there isn't this right exact answer and we do the math and here you go. It all comes down to you and your priorities and what you're willing to tolerate to make a good plan work for you. Welcome to Tell Your Boss I Quit with me, Pete Gutekunst, the podcast where we help you financially bridge from where you've started to the life goals you've imagined.
We've obviously talked about a lot in our days, going back and forth. And one thing that's always kind of intrigued me as someone who's not quite close enough to retirement, at least not yet, fingers crossed, maybe I'll stumble into it early. But just what that dynamic looks like for couples. You know, my wife and I are both, we're working individuals, and I don't think we're necessarily on the same track as far as like our career aspirations and when we want to pull the plug on retirement. I'm definitely curious what early retirement looks like, and maybe as it pertains to couples. What are you seeing when couples come to you? I doubt they're arm in arm saying we're both going out together. What does that look like when it's different?
Right. You think about it, right? Some people want to work, say I'll work till I die. Other people or I want to get out as soon as possible. And a lot of times you hear this closer to the point of retirement. I don't want to retire with him around every day. I want some my me time a little bit. So yeah, everyone's got a different perspective. And all of this, I think if you're younger or sort of more middle stage, you start out and you plan for you're going to retire at the same time. And I only say that because you want to start with a base case. And so we start out, we talk about purpose, we talk about cash flow and what you need. And we start with that in mind. So let's just use 65 as the time you're going to retire. How much income do you need at that point? Then that's when we start to dial it back. What if one of you doesn't work that long? What if you work a little bit longer? Then we can start to toggle it back and forth a little bit. And what's interesting is the reality is that we'll say today, a couple with no kids is going to plan and prepare for the life they know today, but along the way, they're going to have kids. And so then maybe one of the spouses doesn't work for a period of time or works less for a period of time, or there's a lot of changes. So that's why we start with that base case. And then we start to take things out and say, what if this were to happen? What if that were to happen? And that's why, A, it's important to have your base case, but B, it's important to ask those questions. How long would you like to work? How soon do you want to retire? Would you want to stay at home if you're raising a family for a period of time, or you want to go right back to work? You go right back to work, you got some big daycare expenses. So those are the inputs that start to change, and that's going to drive your plan. So you want to start with sort of the rough cut and then start making some adjustments and asking, what would it look like if I did this?
So I would say the easy answer to this question I'm about to ask you is probably it depends on what everyone's situation is.
I got to pat myself on the back. I didn't pre-answer your question, so I feel good.
Yeah, this is great. Absolutely. So let's say if a couple is going in and they're saying like, yeah, we actually do have a target date. We both want to be out at 65 and we want to live our life. Is that situation easier to manage or harder to manage than people who are just, they're on their own track and they'll call it when they call it?
I think that is really, it depends on how far away we are, because the further you away, think of it this way, is there's a lot of variation that can happen in any plan at any point in time. And so the variation that could happen 20 years from, let's call it the end point or a significant event, the further away we are, that variation doesn't have as much of an impact, or there's more time to correct. And the closer we are to that event, that variation could have a dramatic effect. So if you say you're going to retire at 65 and that happens to be a bad stretch in the market and you don't have quite as much as you thought you were going to at 65, that's a bigger deal than when you get a bigger correction when you still have 15 years before that retirement date. So I think in your question, what it comes down to is how significant or how high of a priority is the goal that we're talking about. So if we just use 65, what if I said, would it matter if you worked till you were 67 or 70? And you might say, actually, I just pulled 65 because that's what people say retirement is. Anything, I'd rather retire sooner. So that becomes a different set of priorities. And so we have to hit our target, more precisely, because we're taking away some variables or some things we could do to adjust. So again, there isn't this right exact answer and we do the math and here you go. It all comes down to you and your priorities and what you're willing to tolerate to make a good plan work for you.
Now, what factors would people be trying to, I guess, assess when, let's say, one person is retiring earlier than the other? The other person says, "I want to work another 5 years." They love what they're doing. It's easy, fun for them, and they want to keep going. What does that dynamic look like when one person's tapping into their retirement and possibly Social Security at whatever point,
Mm-hmm.
while the other person's just working?
You want to think about what your cash flow will be at those triggering events, at those life events. And so if one person is still working, you're going to have that cash flow coming in, that net paycheck still coming in. And so in some cases, what I see is at the point of the first retirement, you don't necessarily need to replace all of the lost net paycheck that that person was bringing in. So, remember, you're retired now. You just need to support your lifestyle. You don't need to replace every dollar that you necessarily were earning if you were making more than enough. So that's what you want to start with first is what do you need? Because what I've seen is in some cases, hey, we can go a few years like this on the one paycheck. Hey, we can go a few years like this on the one paycheck plus some arbitrary amount. And if we're looking at Social Security, let's just say Social Security pays you $2,500 a month. You might say, well, I'm going to my spouse is going to retire. We're going to turn on Social Security. They're going to get $2,500 a month, and I'm going to keep getting my net paycheck. But we really only need my net paycheck and $750 a month, or my net paycheck and $1,000 a month. Why turn on the $2,500 when that number is going to be growing as you extend it and file Social Security later and have a greater income later? And maybe that smaller amount that you need could come out of your investments a little bit sooner. That's going to give you less taxation on Social Security. It's going to give you a greater Social Security benefit. It's going to give you a smaller future RMD if you use your IRA, let's say, sooner than later. So there's a lot of reasons why you might want to use investments or some other source of income first. But what I find to your question is when we get to that point in retirement, people just want to automatically turn things on because they can. And let's really think through what exactly do you need, because that's going to drive whether it makes more sense to file Social Security or get it from some other place. And if we're doing it further in advance, far in advance, that's why you have that base case and you really just use that as an opportunity to educate and understand what your options will be. So when you get there, you're really well informed to make a good decision.
Stop me if we're getting too deep here, because I'm just curious now with that dynamic, if one's got their retirement turned on a little bit and the other one's still working.
Yeah.
What are the tax implications of that? That just seems messy to me, trying to figure all that out and all these different income streams. But what does that look like when it comes tax time?
Yeah, well, remember, up to 85% of Social Security can be taxed. So if you have someone who's still earning a regular paycheck, that's income on your tax return. And so your Social Security, if you turn it on, might be 85% taxable, and you're going to be paying income taxes on that Social Security. And back to my example I just gave is maybe you don't need 2,500, you need some lesser amount. So, and let's say the only place you have to get it from is your IRA. And let's say that number is 1,000 a month, not 2,500 a month. And so you're going to take 12,000 from your IRA. And let's just say tax wise, that's, a manageable tax situation. So you're not paying income taxes on that extra Social Security amount. So net, out of pocket income in your pocket, taxes that you got to pay, you're in a better spot. And now it's a few years later, and then you flip on Social Security. It's not 2,500, it's 2,800, it's 3,000 a month. And the other spouse has turned off their regular paycheck. So now maybe you're getting two Social Security amounts that are making up a larger portion. Maybe you're not at a point where 85% of that is being taxed. So not only are you getting more out of Social Security, your Social Security is getting taxed less in the future. So those are the things, those are the dynamics that we want to think about are, again, hey, I can just solve all my problems, turn on this automatic, reliable income from Social Security, problem solved. But maybe we can do that in such a way, less tax, more Social Security later, and just really give that longevity planning a much more robust, more highly probable outcome of success.
So there is a skill to when to tap in and what time to tap in. If obviously it differs based on a case by case basis, but trying to figure out that balance of when to go in to push, how far to push Social Security,
Yeah.
while also balancing tapping into your actual retirement. Is it so you'd order that in that way, right? Where you'd tap into the retirement first and try to push out Social Security as much as you can. Am I reading this correctly?
Every question you ask probably has the exact same answer.
Okay. Okay.
It depends. So let's say that you need $2,500 a month, and that's what Social Security is going to provide. 85% of that's going to be taxable. So that means 15% of it's not taxable. You take $2,500 out of your IRA, 100% of that's going to be taxable. So I wouldn't just flip and say, always go to the IRA first. That's why I say the answer is it depends. And also it's the proportion of income that you need from these different sources. So in my example that I gave, and you're taking, say, 1,000 or less than 1,000 a month from the IRA to supplement the spouse that's still working. So let's just say that IRA income is a lower proportion of the total cash flow you need, then it probably is going to make more sense to get it from your investments. But if it's a larger proportion, it might make more sense to get it from Social Security. And we're only answering this question in the perspective of how you're taxed. And I think this is this is why I think it's good idea to understand and ask these questions as you approach retirement, because when you're in retirement, how you feel and what you're comfortable doing is important. Even though the math might support one choice over another, you have to feel comfortable. If you're not, you're going to jump in and out and make bad decisions or poor decisions. And so what I mean by that is I could show you the math. Getting money from your IRA sooner and delaying Social Security is going to be a better thing to do. But that means you're going to be drawing a larger sum out of your IRA until you flip on that Social Security. And that for many people isn't altogether totally comfortable. They're worried that they're taking money out too fast or too soon. And even though they know in the future they're going to reduce their withdrawal because of Social Security. So you have to do what makes you comfortable and you can live with. So again, it's all about understanding your options and then executing on your plan. You just want to go in and be well informed. So I guess that's another element to it depends.
Yes, and it depends, and especially for someone like me, frustrating answer. So if you're watching this expecting to get the answers for you specifically, this is why you reach out to someone like Pete to get this done, right? So you're not, you could go on the internet and search the exact thing you're trying to go through and see what happened with this person and think that that's what is your path.
Yes.
And it's totally different in reality. If you talk to a professional based on what you have, it's not what Joe Schmo has over here.
Happens all the time. People go on the internet. I hear I should be doing this. I hear I should be doing that. I read this. I read that. And it's not wrong. It's not bad information. But to your point, it's from a perspective of everybody, sort of the aggregate. And we are all a little bit different. Our situations are different. How much income or how much spending we need to and what proportion is coming out of our investments. Those things are all very different. And then add the human element that I just mentioned. You have to be comfortable with the plan. So the math, again, it might work, but it might just be, you might have to invest in a certain way or withdraw in a proportion you're not comfortable with. And so that advice could work, but if it works almost as well in a way you're more comfortable with it, you're going to stick with, I would argue that's the better path to take because you're going to do it and you're going to feel comfortable with it. You're going to sleep well at night. And you're going to stick to your plan. And if you stick to your plan, it'll work. If you jump from one idea to another, one plan to another, that's where you get into a lot of trouble.
I really liked what I saw from Joe Schmo's plan, though. It was really good. Yeah, but no, I can understand how that works. The internet is a wonderful and scary place if you try to apply your situation to everybody else.
Right, right. Have you ever gone to the doctor and you have your diagnosis all figured out, and then they're like, "Oh, no, that's not what's going on here." I mean, that it's good to be informed, it's good to ask those questions. I actually think the internet is great because it helps you generate questions to have a valuable conversation with your advisor. And so you're not hearing things for the first time, or you're understanding them at a deeper level, or you're also learning what to tune out and what to tune in. And all of that's important. So it all works together.
So let's transition to the more fun part of retirement, and that's kind of spending the money that you have. And I know we've had conversations about this in the past, but I'm curious. The transition's always the most fascinating part for me is transitioning from a working your entire life. You work for so long, right? And then you're to the point now where you're spending. How do you assist people, and how can somebody kind of find that right balance between kind of enjoying retirement and kind of deciding on how to have income throughout it?
Well, you're living your life right now and you're seeing what your lifestyle is like. And so I believe that getting a good understanding of that lifestyle and what it costs and takes is important. And so having the conversation a little bit sooner than right at the point of retirement, so you get sort of into a rhythm and an understanding. So that's important. And then when you're in retirement, I think that most people who live a comfortable lifestyle do the thing. They go out to dinner, they, do an improvement to their home. The garbage disposal goes, yeah, I don't like have to pay that extra money, or the refrigerator, I don't like, but I can. And I think that's how most people want to live their life in retirement. The difference is there isn't this paycheck that's going to come in. You kind of feel like there's this finite source of resource. And that's what good planning does, is it enables you to measure and evaluate how that finite resource will not be expended, and quite frankly, will be able to maintain itself. So when those things that always have arrived in the past do arrive in the future, you're already prepared for it, because that's part of your plan. I'm living my lifestyle, doing this month by month, day by day. Oops, the refrigerator went. Well, that's a lot of money, but it doesn't completely derail your plan. And it's one time, 1 year, and it doesn't happen again. Well, back in the day for 15 years now, maybe a new refrigerator every 6 or 7 years, but you get the idea. That's, I think, is really, it's just if you have a good idea of what your flow is, that's so, so important. That to me is more important than trying to maximize the investment return. If you get a good, reliable, long-term investment return and you have a good idea of what you're going to need, you'll be able to get through retirement with confidence. But you got to do the planning, and you got to stay on top of it.
So what would you say are just like a couple of the more common misconceptions that you're seeing people are having when it comes to planning for retirement spending?
I think on the front end, as you're saving for retirement, what I see is people are, do I save in my IRA? Do I save in my, after tax account? Do I put it in my 401k as much as I can? And I think really number one is you're just saving and accumulating for the future. And so that's really key, is, are you setting aside? I have conversations with people, well, I could do more in my 401k. Should I do that? Well, yeah, maybe, but are you getting the max match? Okay, well, you've done enough there. Maybe you can do more, but then you don't have the dollars for today. So that's one of the misconceptions I feel, is that everyone feels they've got to put as much as possible in the 401k. And it's not a bad idea to kind of spread that around a little bit. But, I'll kind of go on a side note. There's taxes. There's other things to consider that go into that decision. That's one thing. The other thing is, as you're accumulating, those dollars, and you get to that point is, I want to be able to save enough for the future. And we've talked about this in the past, and I really feel I feel very strongly about this, is you're living your life today. And so it's really important to be able to set money aside for the future, but don't overdo it. On the other hand, don't just do just enough either. And I think if you understand and do the measuring, that's really where you're on the right path. That to me is the biggest mistake is people end up with too much money in their pre-tax account, or they don't save enough even though they could have, and they wind up with too much cash because they had excess income and really didn't give it a place to go to. So it just built up in their cash. They're like, I don't know how that got here. I just have more than. They're the two things I see is people have too much. They're either underinvested or they've got too much invested in the pre-tax. And that can kind of foul up your retirement.
So let's talk to the fun side of that. Someone who might be having too much, has some excess funds,
Mhm.
and they're kind of thinking where to go with it, where to allocate this, and they're looking at maybe like a mortgage, right? And they're saying maybe do I throw more money at that? Do I try to aggressively pay that off?
Mhm.
What do you say to someone who maybe is having that thought?
Yeah, that's a great point I guess the knee-jerk reaction would be in today's environment with higher mortgage interest rates, you might wanna pay off that mortgage, faster because it's charging you 7%. I mean, you can build wealth by paying off debt or saving money, and you're gonna have more net worth either way. And so paying off that 7% mortgage, the quick math answer, the internet answer is gonna be pay off the mortgage. The depends answer is gonna be what are your personal goals and what do you need? And in some cases, let's say somebody's putting money in a 401k and they're saving adequately, but they really need to be saving a little more than. And they decide, I'm going to go and put that into my mortgage and pay off my mortgage because it's charging me 7%. And that's a smart thing to do. And it is, don't get me wrong. But then they end up with the house paid off sooner, but not a whole lot of other extra savings. Now you could argue, well, then they'll start socking it away because they don't have a mortgage payment anymore. But A, will you? And B, will there be enough time that makes a meaningful enough difference? Because you're going to need that money to provide for you in retirement. You're not going to get money from your house. It's not going to be an income producing asset unless you sell it and have money left over and use it at that. And that's not really the common plan, and nor is it even a probable plan. It's hard down. I see people trying to downsize, but they don't downspend, and so they'll sell their house and buy a new smaller house, but they don't get a lot of equity out of it. So those are the things that you really want to work through. Are should you be paying off your mortgage faster? If you have excess cash flow and you are saving enough for retirement and you're saving enough for future goals and you have excess cash flow, is paying off your mortgage faster a good idea? Sure, of course it is. Paying down that 7% mortgage. But if you're going to need that capital for some way or another and you're going to need liquidity, having it in the equity of your house isn't necessarily, again, depends, isn't necessarily the best thing for you to have done. So you want to walk all that through. You just don't want to ask the internet a question and tells you, yeah, pay off the 7% mortgage. Because again, the answer is always, it depends. And you have to really think about your situation, your goals.
So people's situation, and I have friends that are like this. I think my mom is in this category where they're locked into a mortgage on a house that they maybe don't even want anymore. But the fear of moving on to something else with a higher interest rate, they're like, this is it. This is going to be my house for the time being. I'm sure that ebbs and flows, as time goes on. But what would you say to someone that you said they downsized, but they didn't downspend? I thought that was very interesting. Who might think, I got a lot of equity in this house. If I sell, what am I going to get that's comparable? Like, it's not going to be what I'm looking for. And I feel like that's an interesting thing with the market right now and how that's looking.
Yeah, I think the big problem with the real estate market right now is people like your mom, the example you gave, would like to sell their house and go somewhere else. But in order for them to sell, if they can't do that and be mortgage free, they're going to end up paying as much for the new mortgage, even though it might not even be as large of a balance of a mortgage. They might not owe as much, but they might have to pay as much or more. And so they're saying, well, why would I move? Why would I give up this 2, 3, maybe 4% mortgage when I'm going to have to be paying 7%? So I think that's a big problem in the real estate market is those houses aren't going up for sale, which is why there's not a lot of inventory, which is why there's price. You have supply and demand, not a lot of supply, but people still want to buy houses. So that's a challenge for the person, buying the house, finding the one they want, and it's keeping prices up. And the person who wants to move, they might be better off staying in place in that example. It might very well be the case. And I would say this as well. You've been asking me, what does a person do leading up to retirement? I wouldn't say my plan is to get to 65 and then I'll sell my house and I'll use that equity to give me another chunk of money for my retirement. And then I'll just buy something smaller, because that isn't my experience where that works infinitely. That's not a slam dunk that you should expect that. So those are important things to be, consider. And you have to live in the environment we're in. And that's high interest rates. You're probably not going to be able to do that. So I don't think it's a good idea to plan for it.
So I would say oftentimes, if a couple's moved and they're kind of transitioning into retirement, how often are you experiencing where they might be in a house that was their family home, and it's way bigger than what they need and what they look for, so they're factoring in potentially selling and buying another house? How are you working with them through that? Because I feel like that might be something that's more common than people might think.
Yeah, you want to now you do want to do the math, and you might not end up with it. It depends kind of an answer sometimes. Is you want to think about where you are and what's wrong with where you are. Why is it not the right place for you to remain? And then you want to think, okay, this other option is the right place for me to be. But if I sell this house, get this equity, move to that house, will I have a mortgage, and what will be the carrying costs of that? And then kind of do your retirement plan from that point forward. And can I manage that? And let's say the answer to that is no, or the math just doesn't really make it a compelling yes. So the other option would be, okay, I'll stay in this home, but maybe I have to do something to my house to make it more functional for my current lifestyle or the future lifestyle I think I'm going to be living in this particular home. So you won't be downsizing. You won't be taking on a larger mortgage. Maybe you're just using some capital to make some improvements to a bathroom in particular, just making some improvements to your existing home to make it better for you living there longer. And that might be less expensive or more manageable than completely uprooting and going to a different place. So that's another option to think about. And, and I think for some people that might be, the choice that they have to consider.
Seems like a decent problem to have if you're like, oh, I got too much space, and you know what, this place is paid off, and I don't know what to do with all this. So yeah,
Right.
I would say that that's I think they're probably
Rent it out to some young college student, and you'll make money on the house. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. People can, you can stay put in your own home to an extent. If you might, like I said, you might have to redo a bathroom and might have to make it so you can live more functionally on the first floor, so you're not going up and down the steps. And that might be some improvements, but that might be less costly than making a move to an entirely new place. So it's an option. And again, it comes back to prioritizing. You start to think that through and say, well, the money makes sense to do that, but I don't like how that's going to play out. So then that's going to put a greater value on the move. So you're making good decisions for the right reasons. You're not just making them because the math is one way or the other.
So this will be the last part I talk about this, because I'm just curious. I don't want to keep hammering it, but we've talked about in the past how the traditional retirement experience feels like, oh man, I'm moving and I'm going to Florida. I'm going someplace tropical. I don't want my bones to be cold anymore. I just want to go to a nice area. Let's say somebody's got a house in Michigan and they're like, I want to sell it. We're retired and we're going to Florida. That's probably not as fun as a process as it was, 15, 20 years ago. Now it's they're probably not making any money really right there. I don't know how that looks.
Yeah, you think about it. The real estate in Florida has come up a lot. So maybe the differentiation, isn't what it may have been. We've heard a lot about how, insurance costs and things have risen in Florida. So it's not as easy as a transition. And I would also argue that you want to think this all the way through. I have a lot of people that say to me, where do you want to retire? You know what? I'd like to retire to Florida, but I want to wait and see where the kids end up.
Hmm.
And some people don't think of that or say that, and they move to Florida and they're like, I moved to Florida and all my kids and grandkids are in Michigan. So then and I see that. I see that where you're at an age where it makes sense and it's easier and you're not really leaving something. And then as you age, you kind of wish you were a little closer to it. So you want to think all that. And again, it depends. If you have a family dynamic where that's really, a really tight family or really a high priority, and when you might have a family, well, I can always take an airplane back to Michigan. But you want to think that through. I think it's more than just, again, these questions are always more than just the dollars. It's really about what matters most to you and then putting a value on that decision. And is that a good value? If it costs more, but it's a good value, then that's a good decision. That's what, having these conversations and running these calculations helps you to do.
And that's, again, I don't want to keep saying it, but that's why people reach out to people like you, Pete, so they can work that out. Like, honestly, thinking, I'm way too logical. So I see the numbers and I'm looking like, okay, here's what we can do. Here's what we can't do. Talking to someone like you who's seen it, seen it before, seen all these different situations, and they can kind of help you get through the process of more than the dollars. Like, what do you really want? It's almost like a therapist, right? You're like a financial therapist.
No, you really are. You think, some people, they were taught to be really good savers. They're really frugal, and that's great. That's a great quality. But then they wind up saving every single penny and just socking it away, but they're still going to work until they're 65 and have what we might consider a normal retirement. And they missed out on doing a lot of things that they might have liked to have done along the way, and that's a shame. And then when they retire at 65, they might be like, gosh, I could have retired when I was 60. I kind of like being retired at 65. Darn, I could have been doing this 5 years ago. So you really got to think about the purpose. And we started out our conversation about spouses retiring at different times. You really want to think about that is, what do the two of you feel you would like retirement to look like? And what kind of freedom and flexibility, do you want to have, and make that happen. And you might find, somebody might want to retire sooner and the other one might want to work longer. So think about what that overlapping period of time might be. And if you want to be in Florida, but you still have to work in Michigan, the two of you need to figure that out. So you're right. As a therapist, you can always crunch the numbers, but then I can't fix geography. Michigan isn't near Florida. Thank you for listening. And if our discussion resonates with you, let's start a conversation about what matters most to you. Go to goodfinancial.com, click contact, and schedule a 30-minute chat. I'd love to hear from you.